In 1977, a unit of the People's Liberation Army began leveling a low hill known as Lake Udun. What they were excavating was not rock, it was bronze. What followed was one of the most significant archaeological discoveries of the 20th century. The intact tomb of Marquis Yi of the state of Zeng, sealed in 433 BC. Inside, 10.5 tons of bronze, more than 7,000 funerary objects, and a set of 65 bells that could still be played and are still produced after 2,400 years, every note of a fully chromatic scale. The estate of Zeng occupies a peculiar position in history, archaeologically overwhelming, textually almost invisible. The major chronicles of the period, the Zuo Huan or the Shiqi, make no mention of any state called Zeng. Historian Li Shuqin has proposed one of the most widely accepted explanations. Zeng and the state of Sui, a well-documented neighbor of the powerful kingdom of Chu, were the same political entity. Zeng may have been the ritual name used internally on bronze inscriptions, while Sui was the name recorded by northern historians. Whether or not that identification is correct, the tomb leaves one thing beyond doubt. Whatever this estate was called, it was extraordinary. The tomb itself cannot be considered a simple burial. It is more like a palace, built underground. Covering roughly 220 square meters, the funerary structure is divided into 4 chambers, whose layout mirrors the spatial organization of a royal residence. The central chamber was the ceremonial hall, the equivalent of a throne room, where the Marquis performed his ritual functions in life and, according to the logic of those who designed the tomb, would continue performing them in death. The eastern chamber was his private quarters, where his nested coffins were placed. The western chamber was designated as the woman's quarters. The northern chamber was an armory. It was architecture with a precise theological claim that the Marquis would continue to exist, to govern, to receive guests and perform sacrifices in a world running parallel to the living one. Political life and earthly pleasures converge in the central chamber. 65 bronze bells suspended on a 3-tiered L-shaped rack, ranging from small handheld pieces to massive ceremonial bells nearly 1.5 meters tall. Together they span 5 octaves. Individually, each can produce 2 distinct notes depending on where it is struck, made possible by the bell's almond-shaped cross-section, which divide the instrument vibration into 2 independent modes. Strike the center of the lower face and you get 1 pitch. Strike the side and you get another. 2 notes from a single bell, each fully resonant, each clearly separated. This 2-tone technology had been developing in China for centuries before the Zeng bells, but the Lake Udun set represents its absolute peak. The bronze alloy composition was precisely calibrated. Copper between 77 and 85%, tin between 12 and 15, lead kept deliberately low. The thin content was critical. Too much and the bells would be brittle and tonally opaque. Too little and the acoustic separation between the 2 tones would collapse. The craftsmen who cast this instrument understood the relationship between metallurgical chemistry and acoustic performance with a sophistication that Chinese text would not articulate in writing until centuries later. The bells are also covered in text, 3,755 characters to be precise, inlaid in gold, distributed across the surfaces of the instrument set and the chime stones. These are not dedicatory inscriptions of the kind found on most Zhou ritual bronzes, not messages glorifying ancestors, not records of military victories. They are systematic technical, exhaustive music theory, a complete nomenclature of pitch standards and movable note functions, the relationship between them, and, most remarkably, a set of equivalency formulas correlating the musical terminology of Zeng with that of 4 other states: Chu, Jiu, Jin, and Qi. A single inscription might specify that the pitch standard called Sui Bin in Zeng is called Pinghuan Qinchu and Jitse in Shen. These formulas imply that by the 5th century BC, different states had developed divergent systems of pitch nomenclature as expressions of ritual and dynastic independence. There is a crucial detail about where these inscriptions are placed: on the back faces of the bells, hidden from the performance during a concert. A musician playing these instruments could not read the text inscribed on them, which means the inscriptions were not written for musicians. They were written as a declaration of intellectual mastery, placed where only the spirits could see it, asserting the Marquis' command over the structured order of the universe. The political dimension of the tomb is most explicit in a single object: a large bronze bell in the central chamber. Unlike the rest, it was not cast in Zeng's own workshops. It came from the kingdom of Chu, as specified by the dedication of King Hui of Chu, who recorded that it was presented to Marquis Yi in 433 BC to commemorate his funeral. The king of the most powerful southern state personally contributed to the burial equipment of this small polity. The relationship was not between equals. Zeng existed firmly within Xu's political orbit, while the Marquis Yi clan lineage connected him genealogically to the royal Zhou house of the north, leaving the Zeng court navigating between 2 gravitational fields simultaneously. The bell is also a diplomatic document, one that places the Marquis' status on record for eternity, witnessed and confirmed by a king. The tomb's architecture was designed as a microcosm. The Chinese term is xiang, a visible image of the invisible universe. The tomb did not simply house the dead. It reproduced the condition in which the dead could continue to function. The western chamber contained the remains of 13 young women. The east chamber, alongside the Marquis' own coffins, held 8 more, plus a dog. 21 women in total, between 13 and 25 years old, all strangled. What distinguishes this practice from other forms of sacrifice is the manner of their burial. Each was placed in her own wooden coffin. They were not discarded as offerings, but buried as participants. The belief underlying this terrible practice is precise. These women were not given to the tomb as tribute. They were transferred to the afterlife as members of a functioning court. Musicians, attendants, concubines. The social hierarchy of the living world did not end at death. It was replicated underground at considerable human cost, with the same structural logic that governed each other aspect of the tomb's design. The northern chamber operates under the same logic, but in a military register. More than 4,000 bronze objects, 66 dagger axes, 30 halberds, 49 spear points, 55 bows, 4,507 arrowheads, 12 sets of lamella leather armor, at least 2 sets of horse armor, 49 shields, and chariot fittings inlaid with turquoise and gold. Some of these weapons were inscribed with the formula Marquis Yi of Zeng made this for his own use, making the intention explicit. This was a functional armory for the afterlife, with enough equipment to supply a significant military force. Some of the bronze axes and jade-bladed weapons were too heavy or fragile for actual combat, and likely served as symbols of common authority, but the majority were operational. The Marquis was going to need them wherever he was going. During the Han Dynasty, a few centuries after this stone was sealed, the technology of the two-tone bell would be lost. The emphasis would shift towards string-centered theories of sound. The great bell-centered ritual orchestra would give way to more intimate ensembles, and the inscriptions of the Zeng bell would become unreadable in practice. A system so complete that no one would need to reinvent it, and so specific to its moment that no one would quite remember how it worked. The bells themselves waited in the darkness of the Leguodong hillside for 2400 years. When they were finally played again in the late 1970s by musicians who had to spend years reconstructing the performance practice from the inscription, every note was still there. Not everyone governed the same way in the warring state China. Some secure order through ritual, others through control, and others through destruction. Your decisions about power, music, and death reveal what kind of authority you will have wielded in life and in the afterlife. A hegemonic state sends you a ritual bell as a symbol of subordination. How do you respond? A. You inscribe your lineage alongside theirs, integrating their power into your own ritual system. B. You store it in a sealed chamber under permanent guard. C. You melt down the bronze to cast new weapons. You are designing your tomb for eternity. What principle guides your decision? A. Replicating the order of the world through rituals and companions. B. Sealing the space to prevent any external disruption. C. Transforming all objects irreversibly before burial. A military threat approaches your borders. What do you do with your resources? A. Consecrate them with inscriptions that legitimize your authority before the ancestors. B. Reinforce your defenses and organize resistance. C. Destroy what is necessary so the enemy gains nothing. During a public ritual, music represents the order of the cosmos. What do you do if that order breaks down? A. Restore harmony by invoking the ancestors through the bells. B. Halt the ritual and control the space until equilibrium is restored. C. Stop the music entirely. Without order, there can be no ritual. If you choose A for at least 3 of the 4 questions, you would be a sovereign of ritual order. Your logic rests not on force, but on the invisible structure that organizes the world. Like Marquis Yi of Zeng, you use music, inscription, and symbolic equivalents to align your authority with the cosmos. You don't need to impose power, you make it inevitable. If B was your predominant answer, you would be a guardian of stability. Your priority is that nothing shifts, nothing changes, nothing loses control. You trust in enclosure, weight, and architecture as mechanisms of power. For you, to govern is to contain. If C was your dominant choice, you would be a rector of transformation. You do not preserve order. You decide when it has stopped serving its purpose. Your authority rests on the capacity to dismantle existing structures and reorganize resources. Where others see continuity, you see an opportunity to start over. I ended up somewhere between sovereign of ritual order and guardian of stability. What about you? If your answers were about the status, goal, and how you present yourself in the afterlife, you may want to take a look at our video on Queen Puabi.